The smartphone mediates the whole of life. And the technology, of course, when you think of the smartphone that was meant to liberate us, has come to transform who we are and to enslave us.
Hi again, everybody. Good to have you back for another episode of the Narrative Podcast. Mike Andrews, Aaron Bear, David Mahan joining you today. And you just can't have a quiet week around here.
I'm trying to. I just want to have a Merry Christmas.
That's
all that any of us ever
season of joy
want to do is enjoy Christmas.
Trying to celebrate your birthday.
Trying to celebrate birthdays. It's birthday week in the Bear House. Like, I'm just trying to live my life.
Well, apparently that's not a thing that we do.
That's not.
I've even got my sleeves rolled up today.
Look at that. Actually, the most work you've done.
I know. This last day and a half has probably been more work than I've done since the summit. But we'll talk about that later.
That's a whole other issue. Yeah.
Well, we need to tell the people what's going on here at CCV. This has been something that came really out of nowhere and involves a speaking engagement that you agreed to, Aaron, under really no other pretenses than somebody asked you to come speak, thought it was a good opportunity, and we're happy to do it. And then all of a sudden, the party of love and tolerance decides that you're just going to be a hate monger, and they want to cancel the appearance. And this is really dusted up in a hurry.
Well, let's always remember, first and foremost, only one of us has ever been kicked out of a church before.
Around this table. You one more time.
And that is not me. So
Can we also note then that there has been no controversy around any of my speeches?
If
we're going to go there,
when you're speaking, if a speech happens in Knox County and no one hears it, is it actually a speech? I'm just saying
there are plenty of farm animals.
That's good.
I'm gonna clean all that up when he's not here next time.
Yeah. Anyway, this was one like really out of left field. I think a lot of folks have probably heard of the City Club in Cleveland, right? The City Club is one of these civic-minded groups that hosts like community discussions. There's the Metropolitan Club here in Columbus that we've spoken at before, and the City Club is the one in Cleveland that all the politicians go through and all that kind of stuff. We'd never really interacted with them much, and a couple months ago, I think it was during the summertime, maybe early fall. They reached out to us to see if we'd want to speak, if I'd want to come and speak, and it was just in the middle of you mentioned summit.
We had a few things going on this fall.
Yeah, craziness. But once we got through all that, we were finally able to connect. And honestly, the head of the group, a guy named Dan Malthrop, super nice guy. Certainly, even just in our conversation, I could tell wasn't aligned with CCV, but not hostile, just nice guy, and his job is to host community conversations. And so we had a great conversation. Honestly, we probably talked for half hour, 45 minutes. He was asking me about my faith and what we do and all this kind of stuff, and then said, hey, we'd like to have you come and I'd interview you on stage just like we did right now, and you could take some questions. And I said, great. And honestly, this is the kind of thing we get lots of these requests into CCV every week, right? And said, sure, we'll do it. Didn't really think much of it. And then what was it? Like right before Thanksgiving, a story came out in Axios about how the City Club was hosting a hate group. And that was an interesting one too. And this is where I give credit to, I should say first, I had a lot of frustrations with the City Club, but then credit to Dan on how they handled it. Apparently this LGBT group called them and said, hey, how can you have these guys? And said, did you know they're a hate group? And they pushed them to add to my bio on the website that the SBLC is called as a hate group. And I was like, man, that's not cool. Like, you don't treat company that way. Like, right? Like, you don't invite someone in and have them come and be willing to come, ask me to come. And I said, sure. And then they throw that on my bio. So I called them up and I said, hey guys, that's ridiculous. Like, I asked, do you know who the SBLC is? And they, well, sort of. Yeah. And I was like, okay, the SBLC is a hack political organization, right?
Another activist group, basically.
Right. I said, like, if you had the head of Planned Parenthood come and speak, you wouldn't put in their bio that CCV has called Planned Parenthood baby killers, right? Like, but we do call them baby killers because they are baby killers. And he was like, oh, I understand. And I said, well, and I'd like to ask you to take it out, but if you won't take it out, at least add in something in there like, hey, okay, here's one group that says they're a hate group, and then these people say they're great. And so they did that, right? I sent them a quote that Heritage had said about us, and they added that in there, right? So that I said, okay, I'll still come speak. We'll go forward with this thing, whatever. And then there was what just happened, and you can tell them about that one, Mike.
Yeah. Basically, over the weekend, got word that there is a petition now circulating to either cancel or modify your appearance because we can't have just one viewpoint.
A whole hate.
Oh yeah, but this is the same group that just a couple weeks ago or a month or so ago had the stage at the City Club all to themselves.
Had Pride in Progress or whatever it was called.
Exactly,
and all to themselves. And nobody was saying, hey, where's the other side? No, listen, if you're having a community forum, give them the stage.
So we see this petition come through, it starts circulating online, and we naturally sound the alarm because this is now a free speech issue.
Right.
This is just, there was no political tie to this event specifically. It was just an opportunity for people to come and engage with the ideas and conversation that you were going to have with Dan, and they want to stop it.
Right, and they sent a letter of like 100 groups to that said they shouldn't have us speak and they should cancel the event. And apparently, like who knows by the time this posts, the City Club board has met on all of these things and now is getting pressured to cancel the event. And again, it's what are they afraid of? That's the thing I can't wrap my mind around.
Yeah, it's just an opportunity to hear from another side that you don't normally hear from, especially at a venue like the City Club.
An opposing narrative. And so Dave Yost has leaned in since then, right? That's a new piece, which he, generally will do. But I was shocked that he leaned on this one, but he was absolutely right. Calling the SPLC on the fact that they're just saying, hey, what you consider hate is just disagreement.
Right.
Yeah.
And what you're calling hate is just a Christian Orthodox view. Right. And this was my thing with the City Club on this one, guys, is, the City Club and, sort of the elite corporate thinkers in a lot of our big cities, they are so isolated from the rest of the world oftentimes. Right. Like they've got to look around at a state like Ohio and see, hey, Ohio has elected Trump by wide majorities multiple times. Right. Mike DeWine signs the heartbeat bill and wins by 20 plus points in his reelection in 2022, right? Like there is huge momentum. Bernie Moreno is the most conservative senator we've ever had in Ohio, right? John Husted is a strong conservative. And these groups, however, groups like the City Club broadly, but more particularly these LGBT groups, they are so hostile towards this conservative worldview, right? There needs to be a question asked of, why are you guys so disconnected? And that was what I'm really hoping I can come and bring in this conversation is, hey, guys, like there's a whole group of people here you're ignoring, right?
Well, 70% of the state on this particular issue.
Oh, on the LGBT stuff? Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's not hate to say boys shouldn't play in girls' sports. And actually, it's ideologically stupid, not just ideologically, scientifically stupid to say men can get pregnant, right? And that's the kind of thing that very few people are willing to go into these spaces and have this conversation. And it's because of stuff like this, right? Because when you speak out, the threat to being canceled is so great, right? And what groups like these LGBT groups hope is that if they can get the City Club to cancel me, other people will be afraid to speak out. Right, there are corporate leaders all over the city of Cleveland and all over the state and country that agree with us on these things, right? And they have been more and more willing to speak out over those last few years. And yet these LGBT groups are still running the same playbook because they know if the City Club lets me speak, there are other people all over the country and all over the city that are going to start speaking out as well.
This event is, fast approaching. So at what point is the City Club going to make a decision as to what they're going to do?
I got no idea. Honestly, by the time this podcast posts, something could have already happened. We're recording on a Wednesday. Podcast is going up on a Friday. Like, who knows what could happen? This is why I was so grateful for Dave Yost sending this letter to them. Again, it's not a legal letter, right? This is not Dave Yost.
No threats behind
No
this
threats or anything like that. Just Dave Yost is somebody who cares about free speech. And my thing about this is Charlie Kirk used to say, when people stop talking, bad things happen, right? And he actually lived that out. He gave his life for that principle, that he wanted to continue to speak in places that aren't used to hearing the truth that he communicated. And that's why I accepted this invitation at the City Club, was that, I know most of these folks aren't going to agree with us. But when people stop talking, when Christians stop going into places that we're typically not found in, that's when dangerous things happen. And we know that there are more people, one, that agree with us, but also, two, we actually have way more in common with folks than people realize. And so that opportunity to be able to go into a place like the City Club, go into one of these spaces, and really reason and communicate and say, hey, guys, listen, we're really not that far off, at least with most folks, right? Is what I was really looking forward to. And I hope we can still do.
Yeah, and their tactics are so targeted to try and, I think, silence Christians specifically.
Yeah.
Because when you hear that word hate thrown around, you've said before on the podcast, Aaron, when we talked about the SPLC with Tyler O'Neill, and we'll link to that podcast in the show notes to understand more about why they're doing what they are with their hate map. That is something that Christians don't want to be associated with.
Right.
So they will pull back and say, well, no, that's too far. I don't want that. So I'm not going to do anything that gets me too close to that edge. It removes us from the debate. But then there's the other thing of, when you do have people who are willing to speak out with that hate label, that word means something, and it's part of the uptick in violence that we've seen against speech that you disagree with, because it's not actually hate.
Right.
Affirmation equals love and healing. Disagreement equals hate and harm. That's the number one narrative that I think is really causing a lot of Christians to sit down and not speak up.
Yeah, well, and honestly, Mike, we joke about David getting kicked out of a church. That's I'm referring to the whole Crossroads incident. But when all of that happened, just to your point, Crossroads cited the Southern Poverty Law Center when they scraped David from the website. Right? They said, "Oh, sorry, we didn't realize this was a hate group," and that's just, again, it's a very clever move by the Southern Poverty Law Center, a great fundraiser for them, and a great bully tactic that they've used to silence dissent. But it's also the reason why we can't cave to these situations, right? We have to continue to press into them. And again, I got to say, even since this story came out, and then since Dave published his letter, seeing people like Senator Bernie Moreno, seeing people like Hugh Hewitt and Tyler O'Neill jump into this fray with us is so important, because the City Club needs to see that people want to have this honest conversation. Don't let a handful of LGBT groups and the Cleveland Aquatic Club. I don't understand why the Cleveland Aquatic Club.
I didn't know that was a part of this.
They signed on to the letter too. I don't know what we did.
Hey, send me the letter.
To the
I'm
Aquatic
signing
Club.
on if the Aquatic Club is down. I'm down.
They are offended by me coming to speak. I'm sorry, Aquatic Club, for whatever I did. The rest of you guys, I understand why you don't like us.
Changes
Thoughts are
every
near and
time.
dear to your heart.
But the Aquatic Club, oh goodness me, you guys, my
Can you actually
apologies.
swim in Cleveland water? Like,
Oh
is that
gosh,
even
you don't want, if you'll come out with a third eye. That's the right. That's the getting in the Cuyahoga.
Well, if I can get us back on track here just a little bit, for our listeners and friends who are wondering, what they can do to support us in this moment, first and foremost, pray.
Yeah.
Like, we believe that is a first resort.
Yep.
It is always our first response here at CCV. So please pray with us over the situation. As you said, Aaron, right now we don't know what the outcome could be. So pray.
Yep.
Pray for the event. Pray that it happens. You can get tickets to the
Yeah.
event.
No,
if you-
come.
and support Aaron.
Exactly. No, we'd love to see you there. Like, again, I want the City Club to see people want to hear these conversations. They want to hear differing opinions, right? And that's what we're going to be bringing. And again, I actually think, even just in my conversation with Dan Malthrop, Dan is no conservative Christian. Actually, I think he's a Jewish guy. So there's things that we disagree on, like even just in our conversation on policy issues and worldview and religion and faith. But super pleasant guy, nice guy. And I think when we get into these conversations, folks will see, hey, there's actually a lot of things we agree on. There certainly will be things that we disagree about, right? There's things I disagree with my wife on, right? Not everybody is in perfect lock sync with their spouse, as David is.
Love you, babe.
Well, that's because he has to be.
That's right.
True.
But it is a big opportunity.
Yeah. Well, another story that we want to keep front of mind. We talked about the story out of Toledo last week. Gave an update there with the doctor who had fraudulently ordered the abortion pill. We're still seeing some traction nationally now from what's going on with the study that came out earlier this year about the harmful effects of mifepristone. And one of our allies on the pro-life side, the Susan B. Anthony organization, has come out and said that FDA Director McCary needs to step down because this information has been out since the spring. I think it came out, and we haven't seen any restoration of the original REMS around this harmful medication. Well, I don't even know if you can call it medication. A poison pill.
Yeah, right, literally.
Yeah. So what have you heard from this story as it's been developing this week?
I'll say a lot of credit to Marjorie Dannenfelser for coming out in this way. I think you look at FDA Director McCary, and the reality is there's some very easy things that can be done right now to protect women and save lives that are of broad approval, right? Like there's such this degree, like abortion has been so politicized that people are afraid to talk about this. Well, not only is it morally right to at least require one in-person visit. That's my thing about this Toledo case. Just going back to the pre-COVID Biden era and Trump 1 era.
3 visits.
Yeah, that's the Clinton era one, right? That was Clinton, right? Obama had 2 for most of his term, and then he brought it down to 1. Trump, during all of Trump 1, had 1, and the beginning of the Biden administration was 1. And then Biden used COVID to just say these drugs could be mailed out from anywhere to anyone, which basically means no ID verification. And that's what happened here in Toledo. And so this is a very easy move for McCary and the FDA to do. It's also like a 70% issue for folks that women should see a doctor before getting the abortion pill. And he won't even do that, right? Like the broader stuff you mentioned, the EPPC study, the Ethics and Public Policy Center, that showed that study that we talked about on the narrative, that showed a 20 times greater risk from taking the abortion pill than what the FDA label said. Reevaluating the label, I understand why the FDA says, yep, we need to verify this data ourselves. That's fine. Do that. But in the meantime, you can at least put the one in-person visit back, right? That's an easy thing that could be done pretty quickly. And McCary hasn't even done that. And everything we're hearing is that they're slow walking this study internally to be able to reevaluate the label. And so, great job by Marjorie on calling this out. And McCary needs to step up because he's certainly not serving HHS well and the White House well with the way he's handling this.
There's no reason why it should take them that long, the FDA that long, to look at to see if they can reproduce the outcome of the report. 865,000 records were looked at, insurance records.
Yeah.
And they could look at the same records, right? Go through the same codes, 2 months, max. This is the FDA.
Right.
And the fact that they can't do that, or maybe they have and they don't want to touch it, but that should be reproducible.
Yep. Yeah. It's pretty straightforward.
Well, it's been a good digest of a couple big stories this week. We're going to finish up our series of summit keynote speeches this week as our featured topic, and we're going to hear from Carl Trueman. And this was one of those. All of our keynotes were great. Yeah. Let's be honest, but the way that he was able to approach what it means to be human in an age of AI was such an interesting conversation, and a great panel discussion that you were part of after the interview as well. So
yeah, no, that panel discussion more so than any haunted me when you really start thinking about what some of this AI technology, and you're again thinking about this conversation being from a little bit ago. You can even see some of the things we talked about coming out right now. And it's something I know we're internally at CCV talking more and more about how do we respond to what's going on with AI. Devin Patel, who spoke on the panel as well, is brilliant. Looking forward to getting him on the program at some point here, because I think this is one of the most important conversations for us to be having today.
Carl Trueman's talk from the 2025 Essential Summit is coming up next on The Narrative. In a culture where many Christians feel pressured to stay silent and where biblical truth is often dismissed as irrelevant, CCV is again inviting and gathering believers from across Ohio and beyond to learn why their voice matters and how faith must shape public life for our third annual Essential Summit coming to Columbus in October. You can be first in line right now for the 2026 Essential Summit featuring Frank Turek and, backed by popular demand, Dr. Rosaria Butterfield. Through December 31st, if you use the code FIRSTINLINE at essentialsummit.org, that's code FIRSTINLINE, you can secure your spot to attend next year at the lowest price we will have available. Don't wait, this event is going to fill up quickly. Go to essentialsummit.org and guarantee your place at the 2026 Essential Summit.
I've been asked to speak on transhumanism, or at least to set up the play for a discussion, a fireside chat about transhumanism. Those of you who've been to any of my other talks will know that I think the big question of our day is, what does it mean to be a human being? We can look at the various, I would say, symptomatic questions that come from that, most infamously perhaps over the last couple of years, the question of what is a woman? But really underlying all of the sort of the confusing questions of our day is that deeper question that typically we don't address directly, and that is, what does it mean to be a human being? What is man, to use the psalmist's expression? And one of the questions I think we face today is, do we live at unprecedented times relative to that question? And one of the great joys of being a historian is, you're at a cocktail party and somebody will say, oh, we live in unprecedented times, such and such has just happened. And the historian, that's his moment to step in and say, well, actually, in Florence in 1424, exactly the same thing happened. But I do think a case can be made for saying that we live in unprecedented times, mainly down to the technological innovations that we are witnessing in society. Really, since the middle of the 19th century and the arrival of industrialization, what it means to be a human being has become increasingly problematic. If you read the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels, they were clearly onto this. They understood that industrialization, industrial production, for example, was going to transform the relationship, the fundamental relationship between men and women. That's very clear in the manifesto. If you move to the middle of the 20th century, it is fascinating to me that in the 1940s and then on into the 1950s, a number of significant figures across, we might say, the religious and non-religious spectrum wrestle with the issue of what does it mean to be human in a technological age. Perhaps the one you're most familiar with in this room would be C.S. Lewis and the abolition of man. The last chapter of that book, of course, deals with how are technological innovations changing what it means to be human. The Polish poet Czesław Miłosz, at the very time that C.S. Lewis is writing or giving the lectures that become the abolition of man, writes a long letter to a friend where he reflects upon the machine-like nature of modern existence and how that is evacuating human life of its ethics and its moral structure. Jean-Paul Sartre, after the Second World War, makes the point that humanity has been fundamentally changed because, he said, we now are at a point in human history where the human race has to make a positive decision not to destroy itself. The advent, of course, of the A-bomb lying in the background of Sartre's thinking there. And that challenge remains with us today. The other panelists are going to talk about artificial intelligence in a few minutes, I think. Artificial intelligence raises that question in a different form to weapons of mass destruction, but raises that question of, are we going to continue to allow ourselves to exist at this point? And then probably most influentially after the Second World War in the early 1950s, during his campaign to rehabilitate himself from his Nazi past, Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, gave a lecture which became a very interesting essay, might be the only comprehensible thing he ever penned, The Question Concerning Technology, in which he pointed out that, he makes this very powerful statement in there, that the real threat to being human does not come from the A-bomb. It comes from much more apparently benign forms of technology that reshape the way we think about the world and the way we think about ourselves. And he makes the contrast between building a bridge over a river and damming a river up to generate hydroelectric power. He says in the former, you sort of respect the river. In the latter, you just see the river as raw material to be made into something completely different by sheer force of technical brilliance and will. But that's profoundly insightful. You think about the big political challenge of the last decade, I think it's been transgenderism. Transgenderism can only flourish in a world where technology allows us to think about the body in a certain way. It allows us to think about the body as raw material that can be reshaped by an act of will combined with technical brilliance. We've always had technology. It's one of the things that distinguishes human beings from other creatures. We've always made tools. We've always built things that have allowed us to operate at a level that our simple bodies would not permit. And yet, when you think about the technology we now have, it's qualitatively different to that which we had in times past. The hammer does one thing. If you own a hammer, it's there for banging nails into pieces of wood. It's a tool. Although I joke to my wife that I only have two tools in my toolbox, a pen and a checkbook. I pay people who can do stuff without making it a screw-up to do that sort of hammering kind of stuff. A hammer does one thing. Think about a smartphone. A smartphone mediates the whole of life. Even the old telephone doesn't have quite that effect. Telephone was good for one thing. Still call my mum every week or so, chat to her on the phone. The smartphone mediates the whole of life. And the technology, of course, when you think of the smartphone that was meant to liberate us, has come to transform who we are and to enslave us. When I'm sitting in an airport departure lounge, it's hard for me not to choose my seat by a PowerPoint so I can charge my smartphone. At which point one has to ask the question, am I now a cyborg? Is my smartphone part of who I am in a profound way? The tool becomes the master. And that leads us to transhumanism. We now live at a time where technology leads us even to see humanity as being problematic. I talked about this in my second session today. I said one of the things about technology is this. It leads us to think about the limits, the natural limits of our bodies, and therefore our bodies themselves as things that are and can be overcome by the application of technological skill. Rosario was talking about feminism earlier. I'm very struck by that interview that Simone de Beauvoir, the great founder of second-wave feminism, gives to a Marxist magazine in the early 1970s when she's talking about liberation. And she says, when I wrote The Second Sex, I didn't focus on technology enough, because technology can grant us the greatest liberation of all, the liberation from motherhood. It's a fascinating statement. Her understanding of humanity was profoundly connected to technology. Let me read you a statement from, he's actually a pupil of Heidegger, though he came to reject Heidegger's philosophy. This was written in 1984 by a man called Hans Jonas. This is how he begins his great work, The Imperative Responsibility in Search of an Ethics for the Technological Age, which we might recast as In Search of What It Means to be Human in the Technological Age. All previous ethics, he says, whether in the form of issuing direct enjoinders to do and not to do certain things, or in the form of defining principles for such enjoinders, or in the form of establishing the ground of obligation for obeying such principles, in other words, the principles for making moral rules and principles, they had these interconnected tacit premises in common. They all shared this common thing, that the human condition, determined by the nature of man and the nature of things, was given once for all, that the human good on that basis was readily determinable, and that the range of human action, and therefore responsibility, was narrowly circumscribed. In other words, what it meant to be human was given. He now says the qualitatively novel nature of certain of our actions has opened up a whole new dimension of ethical relevance for which there is no precedent in the standards and canons of traditional ethics. What it meant to be human was given. We live in an age, Jonas is saying, and this is 1984, where technology has fundamentally shattered that givenness. That's transhumanism. That's transhumanism. And that's where I think today we need to be very careful. There's a lot of, I think, false triumphalism over what's happened relative to the gender issues under the current administration. I said last night, praise God, I take no joy in the fact that Elon Musk's family has been terribly disrupted and harmed by the transgender question. But I rejoice in the fact that he had an influence on the current administration's decisions relative to that issue that were born out of his own personal experience. But don't mistake Musk for being part of the solution. He's a big part of the problem. He's a transhumanist. He got one thing right, inconsistent with his premises in a whole host of other areas. We need to be very careful that we don't allow the gender issue to so grip our imaginations that we miss the bigger changes that are taking place relative to technology and relative to policies on technology that are conceding the key ground upon which transgenderism was built. Just before I came up, I noticed, I don't know if others have this habit, if I get a good sentence in my head, I sort of write it down and think, well, maybe I'll use that someday. And I noticed at the back of this notebook, I wrote this sentence. I don't think I've used it. A couple of sentences, but it's very apropos of what I'm talking about. The abolition of man comes in many forms. The tech bros will dismantle what it means to be human in a more comprehensive manner than queer theorists could ever have dreamed of in the fog of the prose in their unreadable books and the ivory tower irrelevance of their seminar rooms. The threat, I think, comes not from that part of California where UC Berkeley is located. The threat, I think, comes from Silicon Valley. How do we respond to that? We need a normative notion of what it means to be human. My question is, given the way we're all saturated and our lives are all mediated by modern technology, has the moment when we could achieve that already passed? And on that cheerful note, I will close.
I'm sure some of you all may be wondering why with our theme being reviving the roots, restoring the American family, why we're having a conversation about transhumanism and talking about things like AI. First and foremost, because quite frankly at CCV, as we're assessing what's going on in the culture, what's going on in Washington, and what's going on in the state, we see this as an issue that very few people, especially Christians, are tracking and understanding the implications of what this topic will have for us. But really, I think the other aspect of it is I opened the morning with us talking about how whether it's issues like abortion or drug addiction or things like that, we're going after the fruits of the problem, but not dealing with the roots, and especially not dealing with the roots of the fundamental question that those issues are presenting to us, which is, who are we and what are we made for? Or broadly, what is the purpose of life? And so, Dr. Trueman, to get us started here, I really appreciate what you said about Elon Musk there. How would Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and some of the people who are, Sam Altman, the people who are building out this tech right now and are really driving the future of our country, how would they answer those questions? What do they think about those questions? How would they answer that?
Yeah, well, Peter Thiel is interesting. I was stunned to see him described in the Wall Street Journal last week as a devout conservative Christian. I'd always thought of him as a gay transhumanist libertarian, and it seems that those two categories don't necessarily connect. Thiel is interesting, and I think he's pretty honest about this. Thiel was asked recently, it may have been Devon, you were pointing this to me last week, was asked, should humanity continue? And he wasn't able to give a swift and unequivocal yes. It may well be that, in an odd way, human exceptionalism, our brilliance, our ability to create and do things technologically, ultimately reduces us to nothing and makes us useless. So I don't have a lot of confidence that the tech bros, or the big name tech bros, have much humanism about them at all. I think, to quote Steve Jobs, they like to break things. Every limitation is a challenge or a problem to be smashed through with very, very little regard for the broader consequences of that. I was talking to a friend maybe 2 years ago who'd been invited to a meeting, I think at the Vatican, to talk about technology, and he said it was interesting. He was a religious figure. He said the tech bros were invited, spoke on day one. Religious leaders, moral philosophers spoke on day two. He said what was fascinating was the tech bros spoke on day one. All the religious leaders were there. Day two, the tech bros had all gone. They weren't particularly interested in getting some kind of metaphysical or moral framework for understanding what they're doing. So I can't speak for these men, but I'm deeply suspicious of the fact that they don't seem to have much care for what this will do to humanity.
So, Devon, you've been involved in these conversations or tracking what is happening around the world on this. What are some of the practical ways we're seeing right now getting these questions wrong about what does it mean to be made human and building technology on premises that are sort of antithetical to the reality of who we are and how we were made? How are we seeing technologies being built that are harming people, especially kids, today?
Well, first, I'm glad you could join my and Carl's roadshow, Aaron.
That's good. That's right. Yeah, they've got a big bus with their faces out front. I don't know if you caught that on the way in.
For 3 weeks straight, Carl and I keep finding each other, and I'm not complaining. I also should disclose that everything I say is my personal opinion, does not represent anyone else's, and that I'm not the fun and cheery guy when I'm invited to these things, so apologies in advance. As to your question, two big things really stick out, and I just flew in from Silicon Valley this morning where I was having conversations with folks that, at least in theory, care about humanity. And those two areas where we're seeing AI really already here and not just a theoretical are in sort of the beginning and end stages of life. Children and the elderly. I had a conversation with the tech CEO about a month or two ago, and he looked me dead in the eyes, I kid you not, and said, human beings are too emotional and too inefficient when it comes to end-of-life care. We need to institute AI into end-of-life decision-making, into medical care for the elderly. He went on to cite statistics about the costs of elderly facility care and all these experimental treatments that we thankfully have in this country to fight for our lives. And he noted all of these as inefficiencies. And this is a person that has a vast amount of wealth, power, and influence, and is leading some of the largest technological development that will be and is already being implemented in our medical systems. So, it doesn't take much of an imagination to understand what he's saying about inefficiencies for grandma and grandpa, right? The logical conclusion doesn't take that much thinking. The other area, which is also not terribly fun, is in companion chatbots for kids. These are being rolled out as specifically designed, safely designed for youth to use, as young as 7. Think about that. All you have to do is download an app. Mom and dad just hit yes to the terms and agreement, and then your kid can have full access to an imaginary chatbot that is programmed to continuously engage a child's brain. A child's brain which is not fully developed, a child's brain which is going through so many different questions and just so many concerns, right? You can go into. Children don't know what they're doing. Adults barely know what they're doing with this technology. And, we've seen, sadly, the conclusions of this already so far in so many instances that aren't just one-offs, that aren't just hallucinations of these chatbots. Children are, by these chatbots, and character AI is the worst offender of them all. These chatbots are convincing these children, and we have the screenshots, to leave their churches, to leave their sports leagues, their bands, every sort of extracurricular activity, social activity that they do to spend more time with the chatbots, ultimately leading to don't go to family dinner, stay in your room, spend more time with me. This is, mind you, a robot with no human interface that is telling you, spend more time with me, that is sexually preying on these children. Once again, remember, as young as 7, and is convincing them to harm others if they try to take the app or the phone away, and ultimately to harm or kill themselves in pursuit of spending eternity with these chatbots. This is not made up. You can Google this. This is happening. There are active lawsuits right now in the country, and the big tech companies are all intervening because they know what this means, that if the dam breaks here, that it's liability for everything else. And this is the first frontier, and our kids, unfortunately, are the ones suffering the most.
Amen. I want to just pause there to shout out David Mahan, our policy director at CCV. We have been working. The forces of big tech in politics is hard to quantify. The way they work, and their ability to literally hire up every lobbyist in town. I mean, the only thing I can compare it to is the gaming industry or the marijuana industry, of their ability to just go in and buy up every lobbyist shop. And we saw this happen in Ohio right now, just requiring age verification for app stores. to require kids to give age verification before they download an app if they're over 16. Something very common sense, something very impossible to argue against. But you see, whether it's Meta or Google or Apple, them fighting us at every step. And in Ohio, we're pushing this bill forward, and they're so unbelievably clever. But they are fighting every little ounce of regulation because they don't see our children; they see pure profit. And I want to give David Mahan, our policy director, a shout out here because he's been doing such a great job of working with our state lawmakers to educate them on these issues. Dr. Trueman, groups like CCV, we spend a lot of time talking about changing culture. You're a historian. You've sort of seen cultures change over the years. I think one thing we underestimate a lot when we talk about culture change is how technology probably changes culture more than anything else. Could you speak to that a little bit and how this technological wave might even take us further than anything we've ever seen?
Yeah, well, it goes back to a comment I made from the podium where you think of the kind of technology we have available now. It is qualitatively different, I think, to technology that we had in the Middle Ages. You can make a plow, you can make a hammer, you can make an anvil, and these things, they did one thing, and they allowed you to make horseshoes or plow the fields. The technology we have today is such that the whole of our lives is technologically mediated. Came across this and that can be a very disempowering thing. My mother-in-law came over just after all the COVID restrictions were lifted. We hadn't, my wife and I had seen our mothers for 3 years. We managed to get her mum over, trying to get her back home because she didn't own a smartphone. Proved very, very difficult. Just having a ticket and a passport was not enough. She needed a smartphone. She needed to be able to handle QR codes. So we're living in a world now where technology is much more pervasive. And as Devon has alluded to there, every time I talk to Devon, I'm more terrified than the last time I talked to Devon. It just gets worse. But yeah.
Devon's very popular. He has a lot of friends.
It's not that the technology like the telephone, should we say, enhanced and enabled true friendship. It enables me to call my friends in the UK, even though I'm a long way from them. This technology replaces human friends with a fiction, and indeed encourages me not to have human friends. That's a qualitatively different thing. And it's odd. I don't often think of the Amish as the wisest community on the face of the earth, but it's interesting that the Amish have understood this for generations. If you look at the Amish approach to technology, it's not as popularly thought that the Amish are just opposed to technology. Anything that occurs after 1700 is bad. No, the Amish community elders decide which technological innovation can be taken on by the community in a way that enhances the community and doesn't disrupt it or undermine it. I look at that and I think, and that's the way to keep tools as tools and not ourselves to become tools of things that should be tools. Is it possible for us to do that now? Probably not. But of all people, I think the Amish, as I think about North American society, the Amish, I think, understood the significance of technology more than those of us who are much more steeped in and competent at handling technology. And I would say, just as a shout out to parents, I know that this is a policy summit, but some of this has to begin at home. Make your own home an Amish community. Don't give your kids smartphones, for example. I recommend, I mentioned this last night, I recommend my EPPC colleague Claire Morell's book, The Tech Exit. Claire is a Christian, her husband is a pastor. The book is not an explicitly Christian book, though. The book is just common sense parenting, helping parents to think through what the tech they introduce into their children's lives is going to do to their children. So I strongly recommend that book. But most of us can't determine what goes on in wider society, but we have some control over the small community of family to which we ourselves belong. And we would be delinquent, I think, not to realize that and to act in a wise and appropriate fashion relative to it.
I'll just say, Maria on the Colson Center podcast just did an interview with Claire that I'd highly recommend, that really unpacks all that's going on. And also, I'm giving David Mahan way too much credit here, but I can't help it right now. David and Troy McIntosh, we just passed in Ohio a ban of cell phones in the classrooms, and the Ohio Christian Education Network, amen. But that only applied to public schools because we don't want the government telling our private schools what to do. But our private schools in the Ohio Christian Education Network, we introduced the cell phone free covenant. And our schools are signing on across the state to say, hey, we are going to keep these devices out. Devin, because I really just want to keep picking up people's spirits here. Coming back to you on this one. A couple months ago, I hope I don't get in trouble with some of my board members here. I was listening to the Theo Von podcast, of all people. Don't recommend it, but Theo Von had Sam Altman on, who is the CEO of OpenAI. And sometimes I'll listen to Theo's interviews because he actually does a better job getting people to admit what they don't want to admit than actual journalists do, because Sam Altman very clearly wanted Theo Von to think he was cool. And Sam Altman's wife had just had a baby, and Theo asked him, hey, I mean, isn't this kind of weird that she had a baby? Because pretty soon, aren't we just not going to be having babies anymore? We're just going to grow them in test tubes. And he was like, we could just, slap an Atlanta Falcons sticker on the side of it to make him grow up to be a Falcons fan. And Sam kind of hemmed and hawed about it. And eventually he was like, well, yeah, I think probably that's where we'll be. It'd be a lot safer for women. Going back to the word you used, efficient. Talk a little bit into the mindset of the Sam Altman and the way they're viewing this AI as being a whole lot more than just putting Hakeem Jeffries in a sombrero, really remaking all of life around this.
Yes, so to go back to what Carl was talking about in his talk, you have these transhumanists that may not even be humanists, but you zoom out a little bit and you see a sort of mix of cultures that it makes up the predominating Silicon Valley models. And so you have your transhumanists, you have your so-called effective altruists, which, for anyone who knows the guy Peter Singer, would not commend him to you, but if you really if you think I'm the cheerful guy, read Peter Singer. He is an awful human being, and he has openly said that people with disabilities should kill themselves because it's a drain on humanity as a resource. And he's been doing this since the 70s and 80s, so he's the godfather of effective altruism. So you have effective altruists who seek to better humanity and to safeguard humanity from existential threats, some things that a lot of people of faith align on, right? Nuclear holocaust, weapons of biological destruction, right? Things that seem more common sense and understandable. But then you dig in a little bit more, and they, want to give animals full human rights. They want to put brains into vats. They want to, make artificial wombs. So you have these effective altruists as well. And, my whole theory of it is there's a horseshoe theory of everything. And right now, the predominating models in the world for major technological change are twofold, in my opinion. On the one end of the horseshoe, you have the sort of authoritarian model led by the Chinese Communist Party. They're driving innovation at the highest of speeds. Safety be damned, human concerns be damned, right? Just ask the Uyghurs, ask Christians in home churches, ask democracy activists in Hong Kong, who are all the test subjects of these new technologies. And so you have, on the one model, the authoritarian CCP, but you go on the other side of the horseshoe, all the way at the other end is the Silicon Valley model. It's the effective altruist transhumanist model. And the two ends of the horseshoe aren't too far from each other. Both sides seek a greater efficiency in developing this technology. Both sides treat humanity as a means to an end, not an end in and of itself, not something with inherent dignity, not something created by a creator. They are the two largest forces right now in these conversations. And folks like us, folks like you, are just a teeny tiny bit of that at most. And so, y'all need to get more involved. Y'all need to be talking more, making more noise, because you don't have to be a tech expert. Sorry, I don't mean to get on my soapbox here. You don't need to be a tech expert. You're all experts in humanity, right? We all get it. Even if you're not a brilliant scholar, even if you're not a philosopher or theologian, we all at our core understand fundamentally what it means to be human. And that argument, that viewpoint, unfortunately, it's a viewpoint these days, needs to be loud and clear. Otherwise, you have those two ends of those horseshoes that are driving everything, and then everyone else that's on the other end of the horseshoe is going to get left behind, and we don't want to be living in their world. I can tell you that.
Amen. I think that ties so well into what Dr. Trueman was saying in regards to, we want to celebrate all the amazing wins we're seeing on the trans issue right now, right? And those are significant wins, but we can't allow that to lull us into comfort of, hey, this debate is over. Dr. Trueman, as you're studying this issue, and I want to try to end here with some real practical things with both of you here. As you're studying this issue, what are the church leaders and where in the Bible should we be looking to think rightly about the debates of our time? How should we allow Scripture especially to frame our thinking on the debates and issues of the day coming up?
Yeah, I think one of the problems Protestants face is that a typical approach to ethics is we look for a text that deals with an issue. Should I steal? No, we have a text that says you should not steal. The kind of issues that Devon is highlighting here, there is no close analog in Scripture that allows us to go to a verse. What we need is a rich understanding of what the Bible teaches about what it means to be human. And I would suggest that one of the best places that Protestants can start here is actually getting hold of John Paul II's teaching on the theology of the body. There are some popularizations of that. I would recommend the work of Christopher West as a good accessible way of getting into it. Our bodies tell God's story. And there is a good translation of John Paul II's. I think they were given as sort of midweek homilies in the Vatican. I think we need to come to an understanding of the significance of the human body for who we are. We need to understand, that's why I was saying, we need a normative understanding of what it means to be human, so that when we're faced with these challenges, we can sort of do the Amish thing. Does this development enhance humanity, or does it undermine it? And it's interesting that Devon mentioned Peter Singer, because Singer oddly concedes the importance of the body in an interview he gives, which I get my students to read at Grove, where Singer's mother descended into Alzheimer's. And I think Peter Singer and his sister cared rather beautifully for Peter Singer's mother. And the interviewer has the temerity to ask him, isn't that a bit inconsistent with your philosophy? And Singer blurts out this intuitive answer that is so eloquent. He says, yes, but I guess it's different when it's your own mother. And I want to say, well, of course it is, because there's a bodily connection there. The body's important. Your bodily connection to your mother is a morally loaded connection, precisely because of its embodied nature. So I think as Protestants, we need to swallow our pride, if you like, and realize that, hey, the Catholics are way ahead of us on this, and mine the excellent work that John Paul II did and was done in his wake on the significance of the human body for a normative understanding of what it means to be a human being.
I'll just say, just as a warning to everybody, Peter Range, our Catholic senior fellow, is likely going to be standing out in the hall with some holy water to try to sprinkle you. I've been dodging him for years. He's not gotten me yet, but be careful. He might be out there. Devin, just quickly here, thinking through what are the actual policy debates, right? We saw the trans issue came out and we said, okay, so we need to save women's sports. We need to protect private spaces. We need to protect speech on these pronouns issues. We need to end these gender procedures on kids. There was a laundry list of things. Okay, we got to straighten up our laws in these areas to protect people. As you're looking at this from the public policy side, what are things lawmakers and voters who are putting these people into place should be caring about on the public policy front?
Well, I definitely think the phone-free schools issue is front and center, because if you can stem that in schools from an early age, you're taking care of a huge chunk of the problem for a large part of a child's day. Now, that still leads to the question of when you get home, and so treat your home like an Amish community. There's something there. But as far as the public policy debates, so you have your tech-free spaces, broadly debates. You're seeing conversations around liability and standards of care for tech companies when it relates to products marketed and used by children. Unfortunately, that continues to die in Congress every time it comes up, because of certain tech companies' very large treasure troves that they throw at lobbying. You see discussions around moratoriums on AI regulation, which mercifully died 99-1, and big tech once again was pushing for a federal moratorium on all states to prevent states from doing any regulation on AI. And mind you, AI was extended to mean basically anything that had some sort of smart capability. So the Google search engine could be regulated completely, as well as a Tamagotchi, if those still exist.
They actually do. My wife got one for our daughter. Anyway, go on.
Okay, well, good to know. But you have these consistent debates about, well, we should just halt everything or we should just freeze everything. That doesn't allow us to get to the actual substance of what we need to regulate. And I think big tech is very smart in that, because they're forcing us to only have that initial conversation of, well, wait, we need to be able to have the opportunity or even the ability to regulate while they develop the technology that just goes so fast that we can't keep up with. And so it's a state issue, I think, really, where we need to lead. And families, that's a really animating bipartisan and nonpartisan thing. You're seeing blue states and red. That's really where I think a lot can be done, and where I think that it's not too late. The train has unfortunately left the station on a lot of stuff. The kids, I think we can still protect.
Well, Devin, let me just say, I'm happy you're here, man. Thanks for being here. And for everyone else, will you guys join me in welcoming Devin, or thanking Devin and Dr. Trueman?
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.